Okay, we got everything back together. Just wanted to give some tips and tricks here. I ended up breaking the exhaust manifold, getting the muffler, the stack off, trying to twist with a pipe wrench and a strap wrench and whatnot to get this joint apart on the old one. The old manifold was just so thin and rusted that there was really nothing left of it, and it cracked. It cracked down here at this elbow. It's laying over here to show you how darn thin it got. But I mean, you can, well, there's actually a hole rusted through it there. There's not a lot left of that manifold, but yeah, it cracked off at the corner. So no big loss there. It was actually already, the flange where the that adapter goes was actually cracked when I bought the machine, so no real loss there. But I got a new one, and actually used I think it's called VHT, very high temperature paint, but I used a primer, and then that's the aluminum color. They didn't have black in stock, so I just painted all the pieces up with aluminum. The clamps, I painted them up too, put some new hardware on there, just clean it up a little bit. Yeah, it looked all right. We'll see how it holds up to the heat of the exhaust, but at least we'll start clean. Now onto this radiator job. Getting the radiator back in. I think I was planning on putting this fan, get in here so you can see the fan, the water pump pulley, and the water pump all together as a unit, and then installing that after I put the radiator in. It's not possible. I thought it would be, but it's not. So I ended up sliding the radiator in first. You got the most clearance obviously then because there's no parts in there. After you put the water pump in. So step one, get your water pump mounted back on the bolt. And I ended up having to take this all back apart, so you guys don't have to do what I didn't do. This top water pump's held in with 3 bolts. That's the bottom one. You can see that's a short one with a lock washer on it, and then the opposite bottom bolt. There's like two clocked on the bottom, and then one on the top center. And the top center bolt is right there. You can see it, and it's covered with Permatex. I ended up making a little gasket out of Felpro. It's called Caro Pack, but it's just a roll of gasket material I got laying around. But I made a donut gasket instead of using a washer on that. I ended up putting it in dry and didn't realize, but that bolt, that's a long bolt. It's probably 3 inches long, machine bolt, and it goes into a water passage. So I got everything all buttoned up and started filling the radiator up, and I heard dripping on the ground underneath the machine here, and sure enough, that top bolt on that water pump just leaking. I had just a normal lock washer on there, and right out the bolt hole, it was pretty good stream of coolant, actually. I was surprised how much was coming out. But so I ended up pulling the fan back off, and then getting back in there. Let me zoom back out. Pulling the fan back off and taking the 2 radiator stud bolts on the bottom of the radiator and slide it forward as far as I can, get the fan back out, and then I could just get this water pump pulley off. It's pretty tight. It's a, you know, the flange for the water pump's up on the front here. It sits on that flange. 4 bolts go through the fan, through the pulley, and into the water pump flange. But you can just get that off without pulling the radiator back out. I really thought the radiator was going to have to come back out. So anyway, got that out, put some Teflon tape on the threads on that bolt, and then made that little gasket washer, and was pretty liberal with the Permatex. I didn't want that to happen again. So, but anyways, and then I put, how did I do? First time I did this, I did not have this thermostat flange on. I ended up sliding my radiator hose up, just a little bit of grease on the inside of this to make it easier to slide, and got it as far up on this neck as I could. Then I put my thermostat in, get a gasket with some Permatex on it, put this flange down on here, the pipe flange, and then I slid this back down on and got the pipe clamps on. To redo that bolt issue, I ended up cheating and getting that there was still a little bit of grease on here, which really helped me. But I got this piece of hose high enough that I could then bend that hose enough to get it out around this flange without having to take this back off again, because it's all gasket sealed on there now. I didn't want to take it all back apart. What else is handy to know? As far as getting the radiator in itself, like I said, I put the water pump in first, then dropped the radiator in. And if you don't yet have the nuts on the bottom There's, on the bottom of the radiator, there's two studs, two threaded studs there. You see the nuts, one, and there's the other one. These guys here. I think in my other section of this video I covered that, but it's been a couple days, kind of forget. But with those nuts loose, put those nuts on before the radiator goes in. And I didn't, and it makes it fun trying to get up through the hole in the bottom of the machine, because at the bottom of the machine you got to use these holes here. This is how you access those nuts from the bottom to tighten or loosen them. So I ended up having to get a socket with an extension and actually a wobble, or well, I guess it is a wobble extension. It didn't have a U-joint. Then I ended up using a U-joint extension because the wobble wasn't enough to get the nut square to the shaft. But yeah, I slid it up in there with a socket and started it on the shaft. But those are notched in that plate, so you can just start those nuts and then drop the radiator in with them, and then just a lot easier to tighten them up instead of having to start them on that shaft. You can just see, yeah, it's too much sun. But yeah, these new hydraulic fittings going into the cooler, right in where my finger's at is where that stud is. It's just between the center of the pump here and that tranny cooler fitting's about where that stud sits. So, but yeah, drop that in there. Leave everything as loose as you can. So don't tighten those stud nuts up, so that the bottom of the radiator can be as far forward as it can. And then you can cheat the radiator. When it's installed, you've got a little bit of gap between that crossover hose and the radiator. But I actually put a little bungee cord around the filler cap, not too tight, you don't want to hurt your radiator, but around there, and then, you know, hooked it onto one of that hard line there, that horizontal hard line, just to hold the radiator as forward as I could. And then if you take the fan's not symmetrical. It's got, you know, a wider gap between the blades in this orientation here. And then if it's turned 90 degrees, the blades are a lot closer. So I was sitting it wideways, you know, before this hose is in, before this flange is in. And the easiest way to get that fan in there is through the top. I took it out through the side, and it sucks. It really does. So bring her back in through the top, and you'll have a lot easier time getting it in and getting it behind this water pump pulley. But, you know, so I guess to go over the order again, water pump, bolt it in, put your nuts in the bottom of the radiator, slide it in, get it as far forward as you can. Don't tighten anything down. And then, another thing, before you put those nuts on, or, well, it doesn't matter the order of the nuts, but put the nuts on, and also the bottom, you can't see it now because I got this piece of sheet metal here, but the bottom radiator hose, it would go on. It's just like a 3-inch piece of it. I can't remember what I measured out, but there's a short piece of radiator hose that goes from the block to the radiator. But put that hose on the radiator before you drop it in. It makes it a heck of a lot easier. I did the top one after it was in. So yeah, before, I guess, radiator prep, put the nuts on and put the bottom radiator hose on. Drop it in there. And then I've got a couple, I think they're called, well, they might even be radiator hose picks or radiator hose removal tools, I believe is what it is. It's like show you what it looks like. It's like a screwdriver with a pick end on it. But after it's in there, you can get in there and run this around the lip of that hose. Be careful because they're sharp, but you can run it around the inside of that bottom radiator hose is kind of smashed on that, the fitting on the block. So you can run this around that hose and get it to mate up with that flange on the block. So I'm trying to think of what else for advice for anybody else doing this. Patience is your friend. It really is. But yeah, so you get this dropped in there. After the fan's sat in there, then, well, I guess before the fan goes in, make sure this water pump, this orange pulley here, make sure that goes onto the flange. You don't have to bolt it down, just get it in there, because you're not going to have clearance to get it in after the fan's set in. Get your fan set in there. And then what I was doing was, you obviously don't have much room here. My wife actually did a couple of those bolts because she's got small hands. But, you know, get your bolt, find the hole in the fan, and then I was rotating the pulley behind the fan until that bolt would drop through the hole in the pulley, and then rotate the assembly, the fan and the pulley, until it would catch into one of the threaded holes on the water pump pulley, and then just hand thread it in as far as you can. a ratcheting wrench is real good there. It's obviously you don't have clearance for an actual ratchet and socket, but a ratcheting wrench sure speeds things up to get those 4 bolts on the front of the fan tightened up. A half inch is what those are. So, but yeah, got her filled up this morning and no leaks so far. So we'll run it for a while and see what happens. I did drain since you know the reason you're changing this, I'm sure, is because the fluid in your torque tube is full of antifreeze. I'm sure mine was way up on the dipstick. So if we get under here, under the machine, there's actually 2 drains. I can't find any info on this, so I monkeyed around with it a lot yesterday. But so this is back those 2 brake springs, and right in front of that there's a 1-inch drain plug, and this is where the large reservoir is for that torque tube. So there's a pile of fluid in this one, and then if you come up, there's like a 6-bolt flange here, and right in front of that is another drain plug. Need to wipe these off. I put them in wet. But this is the power shuttle. So there's if you've got the seam to the engine here, and then a little bit farther up we got the engine oil drain. But if you come up around, ouch, hit my head. If you come up around that center drain plug, you've got the power shuttle right above it. So this is your shuttle body, and there's a guy that did a pretty good YouTube video on pulling this apart and rebuilding and resealing it. And I think he during his video he was saying that the reason his was leaking was the clutch pedal was actually pulling the spool a little bit too far out, and the machined seal surface on his was actually protruding out the back of the spool. There's two spools out the back side of this thing, but yeah, check his video out. There's a cam, that pin on this pin here is how you adjust it's on a cammed pin, so you can adjust your clutch that way. Good video he did though. Appreciate the videos all you guys are doing on these machines. Those of us that are buying these a little cheaper and trying to maintain a property, it sure helps to know what you're working on. But anyway, that rear drain plug, pile of fluid comes out of that, and so like my drain pan won't catch all that. It's probably, I'm guessing, just a little north of 3 gallons, and then I got probably three or 4 quarts out of this front one. Combined, case says that whole torque tube takes 16 quarts, so 4 gallons of fluid. So you know, you get the most out of the rear. Just be cognizant of that. And the front's pretty easy to catch, but there's a pile of water in both of those before I got any fluid. So but I wasn't sure, like, how do I fill this front reservoir? The rear one, if you get in the cab, you've got a dipstick right in front of your shifter here. That's a 1.5 inch socket there. But there's a dipstick in there, and you can check the level of your fluid. So I drained the rear, popped that. I actually drained the front plug first, which made me a little bit concerned because I couldn't find anywhere on the front end of this machine to fill that reservoir. And then I got to looking through the parts manual and reading how this torque tube and this power shuttle works. And it looks like the return, so the machine picks fluid up out of this rear reservoir, and then it gets pumped up front, goes through the tranny cooler, and it comes back, and I believe it returns into this power shuttle here. So that's how this reservoir gets filled up. So anyway, I drained both of them, and then put enough fluid to get on my dipstick in this middle reservoir, and then I ran the machine and put the shuttle, took it out of neutral so that pump was running fluid through the power shuttle, and then shut it off, and sure enough I got fluid back into this middle reservoir. So you fill from the one port, and then when you run the shuttle, it fills both reservoirs. So after I did that, obviously the level in the rear reservoir went down, so then I topped it up and got it on the stick. So get the dipstick level right, I should say. But hopefully that helps you guys.